If you've ever felt that your child is fighting an invisible battle you cannot see or control, what you are about to hear may change the way you understand prayer forever. Because what happens in a child's life is not always explained by logic alone, and often a parent's heart senses what the eyes cannot yet confirm. Before going further, pause for a moment and think about your child, not only their face or daily behavior, but what remains unspoken. The silent struggles, the inner pressure, the emotional weight they may never express in words. This is not a distant reflection or abstract idea. It is real life, the quiet burden many parents carry while trying to appear strong on the outside. Perhaps you have also felt fear without being able to explain it. Perhaps you have prayed in silence for a long time without seeing clear answers. Yet something inside you refuses to stop hoping, as if you can sense that something deeper is happening in your child's life beyond what is visible. And that feeling is not always imagination. Often a parent's heart detects shifts long before the world recognizes them. Even when your child appears strong, independent, or emotionally distant, it does not mean they are free from internal battles. Distance does not protect the soul. Age does not end inner struggle. Appearance does not erase pain. A child remains deeply connected to the heart of their parent, no matter how far they go or how grown they become. That connection does not disappear with time. This is why when you notice patterns you cannot explain, repeated failures, emotional exhaustion, addiction struggles, confusion, or a quiet loss of peace, it is not always something simple on the surface. Often it reflects deeper internal battles that are difficult to name. And in that moment, the most human question arises: what else can I possibly do? Because there comes a point where words are no longer enough. Advice is rejected. Conversations break down, and a parent is left standing in silence, carrying love, concern, and helplessness at the same time, wondering if distance has taken away their ability to help. This is where a truth many overlook becomes important. The prayer of a parent is not a weak gesture, it is a real form of spiritual care. It is not empty repetition or emotional comfort alone. It is an act of connection between human love and divine help, reaching places that ordinary words cannot enter. There are prayers that do more than express hope. They build unseen protection. They hold things together when everything feels like it is falling apart. They reach into areas of life that no conversation can touch. And this power does not depend on perfection, but on sincere love and trust. Today, we begin with 3 night prayers that can reshape the way you stand before God for your child. Not as magical formulas, not as rituals without meaning, but as real acts of surrender, intercession, and trust. These prayers have brought peace to homes in chaos, restored hope in broken families, and sustained parents through long seasons of uncertainty. It does not matter whether your child is young or grown, living with you or far away. The need for spiritual covering does not end with age or independence. A child remains a child in the heart of a parent, and that bond continues beyond distance and time. But before we reach those prayers, it is important to understand something deeper. The battle for a child is not only fought in what can be seen. There are moments, especially at night, when the external world becomes quiet, but the internal world becomes louder. Thoughts intensify, emotions rise, and the heart becomes more open and vulnerable. And it is precisely in that space of silence and stillness that a parent's prayer can become a real covering, a presence of care that continues even while the body rests. To understand this more clearly, we look at how scripture and spiritual history consistently reveal one truth. God often works in hidden places, in silent moments, and in times when no one else is watching. Many of the most profound changes in the human heart have taken place at night, in solitude, in struggle, or in quiet surrender. There is something deeply significant about the night that many people overlook. When the world becomes quiet, when voices fade, and when distractions finally stop, the human heart becomes more exposed. Thoughts that were suppressed during the day begin to rise again. Emotions that were buried under routine start to surface. This is why nights often feel heavier for those who are already carrying emotional or spiritual burdens. For a child who is struggling internally, the night can become a moment of intensified inner conflict. There are no conversations to distract them, no routines to occupy their mind, and no external noise to cover what is happening inside. This is why many parents intuitively feel concerned during these hours, even when everything appears normal on the outside. Something in the bond between parent and child senses what cannot always be explained. Throughout scripture and spiritual history, the night is never presented as empty or meaningless time. It is often a space where transformation begins quietly. It is where fear can rise, but it is also where God's presence becomes deeply personal and real. The silence that seems empty is often the very space where unseen work takes place in the human soul. There are many examples where significant spiritual moments occurred during the night. Not because night itself has power, but because silence removes distractions and reveals what is already in the heart. In those moments, people are more open to reflection, to conviction, and to change. This is why prayer during the night carries a different kind of depth. It is not louder, but it is often more sincere. When a parent prays at night for their child, something important is happening beyond words. It is an act of presence. Even when physical distance separates them, prayer becomes a way of standing spiritually beside their child. It is a quiet declaration that says, I am still here for you, even when I cannot physically intervene. This kind of prayer is not about controlling outcomes. It is not about forcing change according to human timing or expectation. Instead, it is about trust. It is about placing what you cannot fix into the hands of the one who sees deeper than any human understanding. Many parents struggle with this tension. They want to protect their children from pain, mistakes, and wrong decisions, but life does not always allow immediate protection. There are situations where guidance is rejected, where advice is ignored, and where distance limits influence. In those moments, prayer becomes not a last option, but a different kind of strength. It is important to understand that prayer does not replace responsibility, but it extends care beyond physical limits. It continues what words can no longer do. It reaches into places where influence has been lost. And over time, it shapes not only circumstances, but also the heart of the one who prays. As this understanding grows, something begins to shift inside the parent as well. Prayer is no longer just about asking for change in the child. It becomes a process of inner transformation for the one praying. Fear slowly gives way to trust. Anxiety begins to lose its grip, and a deeper form of peace starts to emerge, even while the situation remains unchanged externally. This is where faith becomes real, not in moments of clarity, but in moments of uncertainty. Not when answers are visible, but when silence continues longer than expected. The strength of prayer is not measured by immediate results, but by its ability to sustain hope when nothing else seems to change. And yet, even in silence, many subtle things begin to happen. A conversation that once felt impossible may slowly become easier. A hardened attitude may begin to soften over time. A closed heart may begin to reopen in unexpected ways. These changes are often gradual, almost unnoticeable at first, but they are real. This is why night prayer is not about emotional intensity. It is about consistency. It is about showing up in faith even when feelings are weak. It is about continuing to believe that something unseen is still at work, even when everything visible suggests otherwise. And as we move forward, the next step is understanding how surrender plays a central role in this process, because true prayer begins not with control, but with release. Surrender is often the most difficult part of prayer, especially for a parent, because love naturally wants to protect, guide, and prevent harm. When you see your child struggling, the instinct is to step in, to fix, to correct, to remove every obstacle from their path. But life does not always allow that kind of immediate intervention, and this is where prayer moves from control into trust. True surrender in prayer does not mean giving up on your child. It means releasing the illusion that everything depends entirely on your hands. It is the quiet recognition that while your love is real, your ability is limited. And that limitation is not a failure, it is simply human reality. In that space, trust becomes the bridge between your concern and God's care. Many parents resist this stage because it feels like letting go. But in truth, it is not letting go of the child, it is letting go of fear. It is shifting the weight from your shoulders to something far greater than your strength. And when that shift happens, something internal begins to change. The heart becomes less anxious, the mind becomes less consumed, and prayer becomes less desperate and more stable. This is why the first night prayer is not primarily a request for change. It is an act of handing over. It is the moment where a parent says, in essence, I have done what I can, and now I trust you with what I cannot do. This is not resignation, it is alignment. It is placing your love under a higher wisdom that sees the full picture, even when you only see a part of it. When this kind of prayer is repeated consistently, it slowly reshapes the emotional state of the parent. The fear that once dominated begins to lose intensity. The constant mental pressure starts to ease. And in its place, a quieter form of peace begins to grow. Not because the situation has fully changed, but because the burden is no longer carried alone. At this point, prayer starts to feel less like a struggle and more like a relationship. It is no longer only about asking for intervention, but about staying connected. It becomes a daily return to trust, especially when emotions try to pull you back into worry. And this return is not a one-time act. It is a continual decision. Surrender also changes the way a parent sees their child. Instead of viewing them only through the lens of problems, mistakes, or fear, there is a gradual shift towards seeing them as a soul in process, a life still being shaped, a journey that is not finished. This does not ignore reality, but it softens judgment and increases compassion. And in that softened perspective, something important happens. Communication, even when limited, becomes less reactive. Emotional responses become more measured, and love becomes less controlling and more supportive. This internal shift often influences the atmosphere around the child in ways that are not immediately visible, but deeply meaningful over time. Surrender also prepares the heart for the next dimension of prayer, which is protection. Because once fear is no longer in control, prayer becomes clearer, more focused, and more intentional. It moves from emotional urgency into spiritual stability. This is where a parent begins to understand that protection is not only physical, it is also emotional, mental, and spiritual. It is about asking for guidance over decisions, clarity over confusion, peace over internal chaos, and direction over uncertainty. Protection in this sense is not about removing all difficulty, but about preventing destruction within difficulty. As this understanding deepens, prayer becomes more structured in intention, but still deeply personal in expression. It is no longer scattered by panic, it becomes steady, grounded, and consistent. And this consistency is what begins to build a spiritual rhythm in the life of the parent. And now, from this place of surrender and growing trust, we move toward understanding the second dimension of these night prayers, which focuses on divine protection and how it surrounds a child even in unseen ways. When a parent begins to move from surrender into trust, prayer naturally develops a new focus, protection, not because fear returns, but because love becomes more aware of how many things in life are beyond human control. Protection in prayer is not about imagining constant danger. It is about recognizing that life has unseen layers and asking God to remain present in those layers where a parent cannot physically reach. This kind of prayer is not driven by anxiety, but by awareness. It acknowledges that a child moves through environments, relationships, decisions, and internal struggles that are not always visible from the outside. And while a parent may not be able to be present in every moment, prayer becomes a way of remaining spiritually attentive, even in absence. Protection in this context is not limited to physical safety. It extends to emotional stability, mental clarity, and spiritual direction. A child does not only need to be kept from harm in the external world, but also guided away from confusion, destructive patterns, and internal emptiness that can slowly affect their choices over time. This is why the second night prayer becomes an act of covering. It is a way of asking for peace over the mind, strength over weakness, and stability in moments of inner conflict. It is not about controlling every situation, but about asking for divine presence to remain constant where human presence cannot always be. As this prayer becomes consistent, many parents begin to notice a subtle shift in themselves as well. The constant internal tension begins to decrease. The urge to constantly anticipate worst case scenarios starts to fade. And instead of living in a state of emotional alertness, there is a growing sense of steadiness even while uncertainty remains. This does not mean problems disappear. It means the way they are carried changes. Fear no longer dominates every thought. Instead, trust begins to share space with concern. And over time, trust slowly becomes stronger than fear. This is one of the quiet but powerful effects of consistent prayer. At the same time, the relationship between parent and child often begins to soften in unexpected ways. Even if direct communication has been difficult, the emotional atmosphere can begin to shift. Conversations may become less tense. Moments of connection may appear more naturally. These are not always dramatic changes, but they are meaningful signs of movement. Protection in prayer also changes how a parent interprets challenges. Instead of seeing every difficulty as a final outcome, they begin to see it as part of a process. A setback is no longer interpreted as complete failure, but as something that may still be unfolding within a larger journey. This perspective brings emotional balance and prevents despair from taking over. And as protection becomes a consistent theme in prayer, something deeper begins to form: endurance, the ability to remain steady over time without losing hope. Because prayer for a child is rarely answered in a single moment. It unfolds gradually, often in ways that are not immediately recognized. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single emotional prayer can express deep love, but it is the steady rhythm of returning to prayer that builds spiritual resilience. It is not about how strongly you feel in one moment, but about continuing even when feelings are quiet. Over time, this rhythm becomes part of the parent's inner life. Night prayer is no longer an occasional reaction to worry, but a stable practice of trust. And within that stability, a deeper understanding begins to grow that God is not absent from the process, even when outcomes are not yet visible. From this place of protection and growing endurance, the heart becomes ready for the final and deepest dimension of prayer: restoration. The kind of prayer that goes beyond covering and begins to touch the inner wounds, the hidden struggles, and the unseen places where real transformation begins. Restoration is the deepest layer of prayer because it goes beyond what can be seen on the surface. While protection asks God to guard a child's life, restoration asks Him to heal what is already broken inside it. It is the kind of prayer that does not only focus on behavior, but on the hidden roots that shape behavior over time. Many struggles in a child's life do not begin suddenly. They often develop quietly, long before they become visible. Small emotional wounds, unspoken pain, unresolved memories, inner insecurity, or moments of rejection can remain buried for years. On the outside, a child may appear fine, but inside there can be layers of unresolved tension that slowly influence their decisions, reactions, and relationships. This is where restoration becomes essential because no amount of external correction can fully address internal wounds. Guidance can help, discipline can shape behavior, and advice can provide direction, but only healing can reach the deeper places where pain is stored. And in prayer, this is where a parent learns to trust God not only with actions, but with the hidden areas of the heart. Restoration in night prayer is not about forcing change, it is about inviting healing. It is a quiet request for God to enter where human words cannot reach, to touch memories that are still painful, to soften areas that have become hardened, and to bring clarity where confusion has remained for a long time. As this kind of prayer continues, something important often begins to shift, not always immediately in the child, but first in the parent. There is a growing sense of emotional release. The constant inner pressure of trying to fix everything slowly begins to ease. Instead of carrying the entire weight of transformation, the parent begins to understand that healing is a process that belongs to God. This understanding brings a different kind of peace. Not the peace of having all answers, but the peace of no longer needing to control every outcome. It is a deeper, quieter stability that allows love to remain present without being overwhelmed by fear. At the same time, restoration prayer often leads to a new way of seeing the child, no longer only through the lens of current behavior or present struggles, but through the lens of potential and becoming. It becomes easier to see that a child is not defined by their current season, but by the full story that is still unfolding. And in this shift of perspective, something powerful happens. Love becomes more patient. Expectations become more realistic, and emotional reactions become less intense. This does not mean indifference, it means maturity in love, where concern no longer turns into panic and hope no longer depends on immediate results. Over time, many parents notice that even their prayers begin to change. At first, they may have been filled with urgency and emotional intensity, but gradually they become more grounded, more reflective, and more aligned with trust. The words may become simpler, but the faith behind them becomes deeper. This is one of the most profound effects of restoration prayer. It transforms the one who prays while also interceding for the one being prayed for. The parent becomes more peaceful, more patient, and more spiritually aware. And this internal transformation becomes part of the environment that surrounds the child because prayer does not only move upward, it also moves inward. It shapes the heart of the intercessor. It refines their love, it strengthens their endurance, and it teaches them how to hold hope even when results are delayed. In this final understanding, everything comes together. Surrender begins the journey, protection sustains it, and restoration completes its deeper purpose, not as separate stages, but as a continuous flow of trust, love, and faith that grows stronger over time. And now, as this message concludes, the invitation remains simple but profound. Continue to pray, continue to trust, and continue to believe that no child is beyond the reach of God's love. Because even in silence, even in waiting, something sacred is still unfolding.